She was sold like a possession, no choice, no yes, no love, at 25. Emily Parker was shunned over by her own family to the most feared man in the United States. Logan Blake, a powerful, ruthless billionaire with only one goal, revenge, didn't want a wife. He wanted a trophy, a living reminder of the pain that had once broken him. But what Logan never expected was that the woman he bought would be the only one capable of tearing down the walls he spent a lifetime building. And when desire turns into when hatred turns into love, something ignites inside. Something changes everything. This story will stir your emotions, flip your thoughts upside down, and leave you wondering, can true love be born from a contract built on revenge? Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I love seeing how far these emotions urging. Leave a like if this story touched your heart. It helps the channel grow and bring even more powerful stories like this one. And of course, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell. We still have so many emotional journeys to share together. The silence in the room was almost as suffocating as the feeling of being ripped out of her own body at 25. Emily Parker sat and watched as her father's pen slid coldly across the letterhead. The contract, that cursed contract that turned her into a luxury commodity, sold to the most feared and most powerful man in all of America, Logan Blake. The final signature hit her like a punch to the chest. The snap of the pen against the table was the verdict, and no one looked at her. Not even her mother, hiding behind a tarot handkerchief, not her father, whose rigid posture barely masked the shame they wear. Broke, desperate, and she was the price they had to pay. Emily tried to hold her head high. What choice did she have? The navy blue dress she wore that day felt unbearably tight. Maybe it weighs weight of humiliation, maybe it was fear, or maybe it was just her survival instinct trying to protect her from collapsing. When the doors opened and Logan's driver said the car was ready, all she could manage to ask was, will he be there? The driver simply nodded. Logan Blake wasn't just a billionaire, he was a legend, a lone wolf known for ruthless deals, billion-dollar investments, and a cold stare that could freeze any room. No one challenged him, no one dared, and now he was her husband on paper at least. The ride to the mansion was silent. Emily stared out the tinted window, watching the scenery change, feeling like a misplaced object, an expensive item being delivered to its new owner. It all felt like a cursed performance, and yet something inside her refused to die. When the mansion finally appeared, perched high in the California mountains, surrounded by pine trees and wrapped in an almost otherworldly mist, Emily understood she wasn't heading toward a new life. She was being buried alive in a soulless castle, and it brazenly when she stepped onto the cold marble floor of the grand foyer and her eyes met his for the first time. That Shek knew nothing in her life would ever be the same, and he wasn't even pretending otherwise. The iron gate creaked open slowly, revealing the silent grandeur of the estate. Logan Blake's mansion rose like a fortress carved into the mountains, surrounded by low-hanging clouds and the constant whisper of pine trees swaying in the wind. Emily swallowed hard. This wasn't a home. It was a kingdom of ice, and she had just been delivered as a sacrifice. The driver didn't say a word as he opened the door. Mountaineer hit her skin with a sharp chill before she even stepped out. The main entrance was grand. White columns, carved wooden doors, antique lanterns flickering despite the daylight, but something about it all felt lifeless, cold, hollow. As she walked through the main hall, the click of her heels echoed sharply against the marble floor. Everything was too clean, too perfect. As if no one truly lived there. Oriental rugs, precisely aligned, cold painting states that seemed to watch her in silence, and that scent in the air, woody, expensive, subtle, suffocating. A woman with a tight bun and a perfectly neutral expression stepped forward and introduced herself as Elizabeth the housekeeper. Mr. Blake will be busy forth next few hours, but your suite is ready. I'll show you the way. Sweet, as if she were just a guest in a luxury hotel. Emily climbed the stairs. Heart-pounding. The room was huge, larger than her entire apartment back in New York, but the lack of warmth, of color, of any personal touch made it feel empty. The bed was made with military precision. The mountain view was breathtaking. The closet was already filled with carefully chosen clothes. Every detail whispered the same message: you belong to him. Nosh sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her reflection in the vanity mirror, the girl who once dreamed of opening a bookstore in Brooklyn, who laughed easily and cried at silly movies. That version of Emily was gone. The woman looking back at her had tense shoulders, tired eyes, and pride hanging on by a thread. She opened the nightstand drawer, maybe just looking for a distraction. Inside was a white envelope, her name written by hand. She pulled out the note, short, cold, signed in Logan's sharp handwriting. You arrived in one piece. Let's see if you stay that way. Emily let the paper fall to the floor, and in that moment she knew serving here would take more than strength. It would take soul. Night fell over the mansion like a heavy blanket outside. The wind whispered through the branches as if nature itself was trying to send warnings. No one dared to hear. Emily remained in her room, sitting by the fireplace, watching the flames dancelessly. She couldn't tell if it was the cold seeping into her skin or thick growing presence of the man approaching so near now. It felt like a storm creeping in. She heard Logan's footsteps in the hallway before he even reached the door, and he didn't knock. He just walked in like someone who already owned everything, including her wearing a black cotton shirt and tailored pants. The billionaire looked like he'd been carved out of stone. His gaze was sharp, cold, calculating. There was no kindness, no hesitation. Is this how you welcome me? He asked, crossing his arms as he stood in front of her. Emily rose slowly, letting him take in what she had chosen to wear that first night, a plain white cotton nightshirt, loose enough to her every curve. No silk robes, no seductive lingerie. Her choice wasn't random. It was resistance. I thought this would be enough, she said, steady, though her heart was racing. Logan stepped closer, his eyes sweeping over her with a mix of disdain and restrained fascination. Know why you're here, Emily. Don't pretend you didn't read the contract. I read it, I just didn't sign it by choice. The tension between them was thick, like the static in the air before a storm. Emily didn't back down, she didn't break eye contact, not even when Logan moved in, so close she could smell him, woody, intense, dangerous. You belong to me now, he said, his voice low and almost threatening. I don't belong to anyone, she replied, holding on to what little pride she had left. He smiled, a dry, humorless smile. We'll see about that. For a second Logan's eyes shifted, just barely, but Emily noticed a flicker of something broken, wounded. This wasn't just about control. There were scars beneath the surface, and somehow she felt connected to them, though she had no idea why. He turned and walked out without another word. The door closed behind him like a final sentence. Emily stood there, breath shallow, pride intact, and the nightshirt so simple. No, felt like invisible armor, fragile on the outside but loaded with meaning. But Shek knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning. Morning brought a pale, cold light through the tall windows, but nothing inside that house seemed to truly wake. Emily walked down for breakfast, unsure if she'd find anyone or any trace of what a home was supposed to feel like. The table was perfectly set, juices, fruit, fresh bread, silver cutlery, and one man already seated at the head like a lonely king on a golden throne. Logan didn't look at her right away. He was reading the newspaper, as if this morning was no different from any other, as if she were nothing more Then a passing presence. Did you sleep well? He asked, eyes still on the page. Emily sat at the opposite end of the table, instinctively putting as much distance between them as she could. Better than I expected, considering the circumstances. He finally looked up. So this is how it's going to be? Sarcastic, defiant from day one. I'm just trying to figure out what role I'm supposed to play, the decorative whiff, the obedient prisoner, or the high-end doll. His coffee cup paused mid-air. He set it down gently. But High's eyes turned hard. There are no roles to play. There's only a contract, and you agreed to it. I was forced. That's not the same. You had a choice. Your family had a choice. They were desperate, Logan. So was I. He snapped, his voice finally rough as a blade, desperate enough to destroy anything that carried the Parker name. The silence that followed was thick enough to fill every corner of the room. Emily felt her stomach twist. This wasn't just coldness. This was revenge, and somehow she was right at the center of it, without even knowing why. She stood up slowly, pulling her chair back with purpose. I won't apologize for something I didn't do. Logan rose too, as if his breath always needed to match hers. Then don't just fulfill your part. And you going to fulfill yours? Keep pretending all you feel when you look at me is hate. His eyes narrowed for a moment. His control slipped, but just as quickly, the ice returned to his tone. I don't feel, I command, and you do. Well, to remember that. Emily walked toward the door, her breath heavy, her soul burning. You may control everything, Logan, but not what I carry in here, she said, pressing her fingers against her chest end. Then she walked out without waiting for a reply, but the silent question lingered in the air. How long could they really keep up this war? The afternoon sun filtered through the tall treetops, casting glimmers over the still blue water of the pool with a quiet, almost poetic calm. But there was no peace inside that mansion, especially not between the two who now shared that space like opposing forces on a silent battlefield. Emily stepped out onto the terrace like she was walking onto a stage. She wore a burgundy bikini, simply elegant, covered by a light robe fluttering in the breeze. It was the first time she'd shown that much of herself since arriving, but this wasn't about vanity, it was about provocation. She walked confidently toward the lounge chair, already feeling his gaze burn into her back before he even spoke. What exactly do you think you're doing? Logan snapped, appearing from the far end with his jaw clenched tight. Emily turned her head slowly, savoring every second of his discomfort. I'm sunbathing, or is that part of the contract I forgot to memorize? Logan descended the steps of the veranda like a storm rolling in high sighs, locked on her fists clenched at his sides. This is a provocation, you know it. I know. I'm in my house now, and as far as I'm aware, I haven't broken any rules, unless, of course, challenging your absolute control counts. He stopped just a few feet away, his chest rising and falling with each breath. You know what you're doing, Emily, and you know what you're feeling. She shot back, locking eyes with him. I'm not a doll. I'm not a punishment you bought me, Logan, but you can't control me. Her words landed like shards of glass between them. The air buzzed with tension, thick with something deeper than anger. A desire held back, forbidden, on edge. Logan ran a hand through his hair, turning his back to her for a moment, as if looking at her too long might be dangerous. Emily dipped her toes into the pool, never looking away. You can keep trying to break my Logan, but maybe what really gets under your skin is that even though I belong to you, I still belong to myself. He didn't answer. He just stood there, tense, still. His brought back a wall of silence, and Emily knew something inside him was starting to crack. She just didn't know if it was the hatred or the armor. That night fell heavier than any before. There was a strange stillness in the mansion, as if even the walls sensed that something was about to come to light. Emily wandered through the hallways, driven by a restlessness she couldn't quite explain. Thus, when she heard it, muffled voices coming from the library, she approached. Quietly, the door was slightly ajar inside. Logan was on the phone, his back to her shoulder stance, his voice lower than usual. No. I'm not going to the memorial, not this year, not next year either. You know why? Silence. He exhaled deeply, his posture collapsing. For just a moment, because it still burns, and because she. Deedbeckers of the Parkers, Emily felt the world tilt, a chill ran down her spine. It didn't make sense. Her family, what did they have to do with Logan's pain? He ended the call and stood there in silence. Then he turned and saw her, his eyes instantly hardened, eavesdropping. No. Are we? I heard my name, and I heard pain, she said softly. Who was she? For a moment, Logan hesitated. The silence between them felt heavier than any scream. Then he finally broke it. Isabel, my fiancée, my first love, the only woman I ever loved before everything fell apart, before I became this. Emily felt her chest tighten. What happened to her? He walked to the bar, poured a glass of whiskey, but didn't drink it. He just held it tightly in his hand. A car crash, she died on impact. And the driver worked for your family, drunk, shielded by influence. Nothing happened. Him nothing. It felt like all the air had been sucked from the room. Emily covered her mouth, stunned. I didn't know. Of course you didn't. You lived in a different world, but I knew. I watched Herb buried. I watched justice disappear. I watched my life fall apart, and no one paid for it. He turned to her, then his eyes full, not just with anger, but with grief, heartbreak, and wounds that had never healed. So yes, Emily, I bought you because your name reminded me of everything I lost, and because for a moment I thought maybe I could make Thepin change sides. She couldn't answer. No words could undo that kind of truth. Just a silence they shared, where the past finally stood between them, no longer hidden, and maybe for the first time she truly understood the fury in his eyes. Just didn't know if that understanding made things easier or even more cruel. The middle of the night felt like an accomplice. The mansion slept rapid in a heavy silence that made each step echo louder than it should. Emily had dressed quickly, jeans, a sweater, sneakers. Heart pounded, not from fear but from urgency. For the first time since she arrived, she felt it deep in her bones. She had to leave, she had to escape before she lost herself. She moved cautiously through the hallways. The housekeeper had left the side door key on the counter. Emily picked it up, with trembling hands, holding her breath. The service entrance led to the old trail through the woods, a path she'd met. By staring at it through the window, Vicky Key turned the lock, clicked, and then going somewhere the voice came from the shadows. Logan. Emily turned slowly, swallowing her shock. He stood against the wall like he'd known this would happen, dressed only in sweatpants and a grey t-shirt. It wasn't his appearance that stopped her, it was the steadiness in his eyes. Let me go, Logan, she said, not yelling, not crying, just with her dignity intact. And go where? Back to the family that sold you like a trophy, or to a world that doesn't even know who you are anymore? Anywhere I can breathe. He stepped forward, his face harder than ever. You think you can just walk out and it all disappears? That I'll let you leave without facing what this is? Emily didn't move. You're the one who started this with lies, with hatred, with this damn revenge. Logan exhaled, sharply running his hands through his hair. For a moment he looked more lost than threatening. I married you because he wanted someone in your family to know what it feels like to lose control, freedom, hope. Then why not go to my father? Why not destroy his business? She asked, her voice steady, eyes brimming with tears. Why me? He hesitated. Because I knew you were the only innocent one. The silence between them was sharper than any words. And still, I'm the one you punished. Emily stepped forward. I'm not Isabel. And you're not the man who lost everything. Not anymore. She dropped the key at his feet. I'm not running, but I won't stay silent either. And then she turned and walked upstairs, leaving him standing there, caught between their revenge that once fueled him and the woman who was starting to break through his walls. The escape never happened. Something inside him began to fall apart. The next morning arrived heavy and grey, a thick fog wrapping around the house like an unspoken warning. Emily sat alone in the garden under the vinegar-covered pergola, watching the leaves sway in the wind. The world outside seemed to carry on as usual, but inside her something refused to settle, a mix of confusion and a single question that kept echoing in her mind. Shahadim. Coming, Logan walked like someone who wanted to be noticed. He stepped steady and hurried. He stopped a few feet away, silent, as if waiting to be allowed into her space. Emily didn't turn to look at them. She just asked, "Why do you hate me so much, as when I never did anything to you?" The question hung in the air untouched. Logan sat on the bench beside her, but kept his distance. His eyes were locked on some distant point on the horizon, because it was easier to hate you than to face what I really lost. But I wasn't part of any of that. I didn't even know Isabel existed until 2 days ago. He nodded slowly, the gesture almost one of surrender. I know, but your name, your face, everything about you reminded me of what I could never have again. Emily finally turned to look at him. There was a sadness in his expression that felt ancient. So you punished me for something I didn't do. I wanted you to feel it, the helplessness, the rage, that hollow despair of knowing this world is unfair and there's nothing you can do about it. I wanted you to carry just a piece of the pain I've lived with for years. Emily took a deep breath and did. You did that make you feel better? Logan didn't answer right away. He rubbed his hands over his face, worn out. No, because the more I tried to hate you, the more you pushed me to feel something else, and that was killing. Inside, she stood up, eyes filled with tears, but voice steady. You used my pain to feed your own, but now you have to choose. Logan, you can keep hiding behind the anger, or you can face what you actually feel when you look at me. He looked at her for the first time, with no armor, no walls, but before he could say a word, Emily was already walking away, and he stayed there, heart pounding in his because deep down he already knew the answer. He just wasn't sure he was ready to say it out loud for the first time in weeks. The mansion came. Luxury cars lined the driveway, waiters moved discreetly with silver trays, and guests floated around in expensive attire under the glow of crystal chandeliers. Lagan was hosting a formal reception for investors, every detail carefully orchestrated, as if to prove to the world that he was still in control of everything, of everyone, but he hadn't counted on her. Emily descended their stairs like she was stepping onto a stage. She wore a scarlet red dress tight enough to sculpt her silhouette, bold enough to challenge every social expectation. The light fabric swayed with every step, like fire itself was. Heads turned, whispers followed, and Logan froze. He found her in the main hall, surrounded by 2 guests, clearly enchanted by her polite smile. But there was something in Emily's eyes. Something loud, daring, unapologetically free. Can we talk? He asked through clenched teeth, forcing a smile for those around them. Of course, Mr. Blake. She replied with sharp irony. After all, the host deserves full attention. She raised her champagne glass in a mock toast before following him to a quieter corner of the room. The moment they were alone, he exploded. What do you think you're doing? Emily lifted an eyebrow, leaning casually against the wall, a faint smile on her lips. What does it look like? I'm smiling, being polite. Isn't that what you wanted? The perfect wife. This isn't perfect. This is provocation, not this is presence, she shot back, after being invisible for so long. I decided to be seen, and you didn't like it. His gaze's torn rage and desire crashing into each other. Like sparks meeting gasoline, you're playing with fire. Emily, she took a step closer, close enough for him to catch the jasmine on her skin maybe. I'm tired of living in the snow. Time stopped. His eyes traced the curve of her body before locking with hers. Again, the tension was unbearable, the pull between. The undeniable, and yet neither one would admit it. Logan suddenly stepped back. Asif, he needed air before he lost control in front of everyone. Emily remained where she was, alone, a soft smile still in her lips. She didn't know if she was winning, but for the first time she didn't feel like she was losing. An nth look he threw her, before disappearing onto the verge she saw. What he wouldn't dare say out loud, she was beckoning. Impossible to ignore. The party was over. The guests had left. Empty glasses still sat on the tables, and a heavy silence settled over the mansion. Emily was slowly climbing stairs, heels in hand, the red dress clinging to her body like a memory off impact. She'd made that night, but before she reached the hallway, his voice cut through the air like thunder. Did you have fun? She turned slowly, finding Logan at the base of the staircase. His suit was unbuttoned, tie loosened and high size. They were burning. I was just being myself, she said calmly, something you might want to try someday. He climbed the steps like he was crossing a line. He knew he couldn't return from the tension thickened with every stride until they were face to face, just inches apart. Are you trying to drive me insane, Emily? I want you to stop pretending you're not already there. And then, without warning, he grabbed the fabric of her dress and yanked hard. The sound of the tear was violent, the neckline giving way and exposing part of her shoulder. But Emily didn't scream, she didn't flinch. She didn't back down. She looked him straight in the eyes, burning with fire. Go ahead, rip it all, but know this, it won't silence me. His chest heaved like he was fighting a storm inside. His hands still clutched the torn fabric, but now without strength, as if in that moment he realized what he was doing. You don't have control anymore, Logan, not over me, not even over yourself. You have no idea what you're messing with, he whispered, his voice rough caught between pain and desire. Emily stepped closer, her face just inches from his. Oh, I know exactly where I'm standing, and you know why? Because I was thrown into this hell with my eyes with you open. He stepped back, just slightly, his eyes stripped of pretense. For the first time, he saw something in her that went beyond resistance. Strength, truth, Sauland, maybe S. That's what scared him the most. Emily turned and walked toward her room, the back of her dress torn, but her head held high, and Logan stood frozen on the stairs, breathing like he'd just run a marathon without moving an inch. He thought she was just a pawn in his revenge. But now he was beginning to see the woman behind the name, and that changed everything. The garden was quiet that morning, covered in dew and bathed in the soft light of the sun filtering through the leaves. Emily wandered barefoot among the rose bushes, distracted, searching for some peace in the one corner of the estate that still felt untouched by the silent war between her and Logan. She wasn't watching her step when she tripped on a root hidden beneath the damp soil. Her body hit the ground hard, let out a sharp gasp as pain shot through her ankle. Damn it, she whispered, trying to steady herself on a nearby bench, but her foot wouldn't hold her. Then she heard footsteps, fast and urgent. Emily. Logan's voice cut through the silence like lightning. He was at her side in seconds, eyes wide, dropping to his knees beside her. What happened? Heast, already reaching for her injured ankle. Just a fall. I tripped, she replied through clenched teeth, trying to mask the pain, but Logan didn't respond, was too focused, examining her injury with an expression she had never seen before. There was concern, there was care. He slipped one arm beneath her knees and lifted her in one swift, confident motion. What are you doing? Emily protested. Taking you inside Norgamans, he said, his tone firm but not harsh. Inside the mansion, he gently settled her onto the living room sofa, then disappeared briefly, and returned with a towel ice and a first aid kit. Kneeling before her, he began tending to the wound with a gentleness that clashed with everything she thought she knew about him. "Have you done this before?" she asked, trying to break the strangely harsh silence. "Isabel used to fall in the garden all the time. I learned the hard way." Emily bit her lip, watching the way he held her foot, his fingers steady, careful, respectful. His touch was warm, human, tender. "Thank you for not leaving me there." Logan looked up, meeting her eyes with a raw intensity. "I may have started all of this for the wrong reason, but that doesn't mean I want to see you in pain." The silence between them deepened. He finished wrapping her ankle, but didn't let go of her leg. Right away, his fingers lingered, resting there just a moment longer, like something inside him didn't want to leave. Emily took a breath. "What are you feeling right now?" Logan lowered his gaze, confused. She smiled softly. "At least it's not anger anymore." He gave her a faint smile in return, his first in what felt like forever, but before any word could cement that moment. He stood up and stepped away, as if her talk had awakened something he still wasn't ready to face. The night was eerily quiet, as if the very air sensed something was off. Emily was walking through the main hallway when she heard a sharp coming from downstairs. She froze, held her breath. A second later, the lights flickered, then went out. Total darkness. Instinct kicked in. She ran toward Logan's office, heart pounding, navigating through the blackness. The door was slightly ajar inside. Shadows moved, and then a loud crash. "Logan!" she shouted, without thinking. Two masked men, one had Logan pinned against the wall, the other was rifling through the safe drawer. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the nearest lamp and hurled it with everything she had. It shattered on impact, glass flying in every direction. The second intruder turned toward Hoodoo, but Logan seized the moment. With a swift move, he broke free and lunged at the man. The fight was short, fierce in the end. Both intruders bolted through the back door, leaving behind broken glass and heavy breaths. Logan turned to her, still trying to process what had just happened. "You used me." Emily was trembling, her face damp with sweat, chest rising and falling fast. "I didn't think, I just reacted." He stepped forward once, twice, stopping right in front of her. His gaze was no longer filled with fear or even gratitude. It was pure instinct. It was surrender. "Emily." Logan, his name barely left her lips before he pulled her into a kiss. It wasn't gentle. It was fierce, heated, desperate, like they were both drowning, and this was the only breath they had left. His hands gripped her waist like he'd been starving for her fingers tangled in his hair, holding on like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Every ounce of conflict between them evaporated. There was no contract, no history, no fear, only two bodies colliding in the middle of chaos. When he finally pulled back, eyes still closed, lips parted, she whispered, "This changes everything, doesn't it?" He didn't answer. He simply leaned his forehead against hers, as if he needed the quiet to absorb what had just happened. Because in that kiss, Logan lost control he fought so hard to keep, and Emily felt for the first time that maybe his heart was beginning to surrender. The morning sun poured through windows, as if nothing had changed, as if the night before hadn't been marked by a kiss that burned down to the bone. But for Emily, everything felt different. She had woken up early, heart still racing, his taste lingering on her lips, the memory of a moment that wasn't planned yet somehow felt inevitable. She walked down for breakfast, a mix of hope and confusion swirling inside her. She expected to find Logan restless, maybe with a word stuck in his throat, but no, he was there, sitting at the head of the table, reading the newspaper, just like always. "Good morning," she said, trying to sound neutral. "Good morning." He replied, eyes still on the page. Nothing, no glance, no awkward pause, no sign of what had passed between them, as if the kiss had never happened, as if it had all been a mistake. Emily pressed her lips together and sat in silence. The coffee tasted bitter, or maybe it was just the taste of disappointment sitting heavy on her tongue. "Did you sleep well?" he asked casually. She looked at him, searching for a crack in the mask as well as I could. "You." Logan finally met her gaze, but there was a wall in his eyes. "Had a long night. Too many reports to go through." She let out a dry, ironic laugh. "Right. Because surprises and armed break-ins are just part of the job." His expression hardened. "Emily, what happened last night was a moment. Let's not turn it into something bigger than it needs to be." The words hit like knives. She stood up her chair, scraping back harder than she meant. "You're right, it was just a moment, and I'm just a contract." Silly me, thinking it could mean something more. He stood to, but didn't stop her as she walked away. He just stayed there, fists clenched at his sides, strapped between what he wanted to say and what he thought he couldn't. Emily climbed the stairs, swallowing the itch in her chest. Her anger wasn't just at his silence, it was because deep down, she knew Logan felt it all, and still he chose to hide. But how long could her ally keep that mask on? The sky was overcast, painted in shades of grey, as if the weather mirrored the storm Emily carried in her chest. She had taken refuge on the mansion's terrace, hugging her knees as she stared out at the mountains in the distance. The air was crisp, but the ache inside her burned. It had been 2 days since the kiss, 2 days of Logan acting like nothing had happened. His indifference was too precise, too rehearsed and unbearable. When she heard footsteps behind her, she didn't turn. She knew it was him. She could always tell by the way the silence shifted when he was near. "Hiding?" he asked, softly breathing. She replied, still not looking at him. "Something I can only seem to do when you're not around lately." He stepped closer, stopping just a few feet away. "I thought maybe time would help." "What, pretend it didn't happen?" She stood and turned to face him. Her eyes weren't filled with tears, but with the kind of strength that only comes from swallowed pain. "How long, Logan? How long are you going to pretend you don't feel anything?" He looked away, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "You don't understand." "Then explain it to me, because I'm not made of glass. I feel I mess up, I open myself up, and are you going to keep hiding behind your pride?" Logan took a deep breath, like he was holding back an earthquake inside. "You changed, Mameli." She froze. Those words alone silenced everything around her. "I hated you with everything I convinced myself you were the perfect punishment, but each day with you, it broke something down. And now, I can't hate you anymore." Emily blinked slowly, as if taking in every word like a bitter remedy. "Then what's stopping you from loving me?" He dropped his head, and the answer came in a whisper. Fear of me, of myself, of touching you and not being able to stop, of giving in and losing again." The wind rushed between them, blowing her hair into a mess, but she didn't flinch. She stepped forward. "I'm not Isabel Logan, and you don't have to lose me to see that there's something real here." She gently pressed her fingers to his chest. "Believe me, there is, and it's alive." His eyes shimmered for a brief second, but he said nothing. He just stood there motionless, caught between the instinct to run and the courage to finally stay. Night fell slowly, wrapping the mansion in soft shadows, and charged silence. Emily walked down the main hallway without hurry, her mind still spinning with Logan's words from earlier that afternoon. He had confessed something, not everything, but enough to crack the wall of ice that had stood between them. From the very beginning, when she reached his bedroom door, she didn't hesitate. "Knock it once, then twice. Come in," came his voice from the other side. Low, almost unsure, Emily opened the door. Slowly Logan stood by the window, his white shirt unbuttoned, sleeves rolled up, gaze lost in the faint lights of the forest below. He turned to see her, but said nothing. She closed the door behind her. I'm tired offering from you, but more than that, I'm tired of watching you run from me. Logan watched her in silence, as if trying to memorize every detail, her loose hair, her calm yet steady presence. Woman he had tried to hate and who now filled every part of him. Are you sure? He asked, voice rough with fear and want. I've never been more sure, she said, stepping toward him with steady steps. He held out his hand, and she took it. There was no more war, no contract, no pain disguised as vengeance. There was surrender, pure, warm, unguarded. Logan pulled her close and kissed her. It was nothing like the kiss during the break-in. This one held no desperation, only reverence, like touching something sacred. His hands moved gently over her discovering places he had once treated with cold detachment. Emily led him to the bed, and when he hesitated, she whispered, trust me, just this once. And he did. That night they belonged to each other, not as enemies finding a ceasefire, but as souls rebuilding themselves. Every couch was a reason to stay longer, every breath a silent confession. Afterward, Logan wrapped his arms around her and didn't let go, and for the first time Emily felt something stronger than fear, the decision to love again, after the pain and in the stillness of the night. Just when she thought he had fallen asleep, he whispered against their skin, I'm not the same man anymore. Because of you, she smiled, eyes brimming with tears but full of peace, because finally they were in the same place. The days that followed drifted by like a warm breeze. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, Emily felt like Logan was different, still quiet at times, but present, attentive. There was a tenderness now that hadn't been there before, a subtle kind of care in small gestures. A cup of tea left beside her without her asking, a folded blanket on the couch, a quick handwritten note that simply read, rest. But something inside her wasn't quite matching that lightness, a lingering fatigue, sudden dizziness, a gentle nausea that came every morning like a whisper she didn't want to hear. She tried to dismiss it, blamed stress, changes, or even the emotional intensity of it all, until the deli sitting in the bathroom with the test in her hands. Emily stared at the box as if she could will the result into existence. Her heart thudded in her chest. She took a deep breath, opened it, did what she had to, and waited 2 minutes, 3, and then 2 lines. Clear, undeniably pragged. For a moment, it felt like the ground slipped away. Emily gripped the edge of the sink, trying to steady both her body and her thoughts. Pregnant with Logan's child, the man who had brought her fate, who had once hated her, then desired her, and who now might be learning how to love her. Hands were trembling. She slowly sat on the cold bathroom floor, back against the wall. She didn't cry, she didn't smile, she just felt everything. A taunts, fear, joy, doubt, hope. What now? She whispered, as if begging the silence for a response. Only time could give. Emily placed her hands on her belly, still without shape, still invisible, beautiful, ready. So real, a new bond had been formed, one that could never be undermined. Though she didn't yet know how she'd tell Logan, deep down she already knew this child wasn't a mistake. It was the beginning she never knew she needed. The afternoon sky was grey, heavy with the promise of rain, and the soft sound of an old piano filled the main room with a melancholic melody. Emily watched Logan from a distance. He was seated at the piano, fingers moving over the keys with surprising ease. She hadn't known he played. The music was sad but beautiful, like his heart had finally found a way to speak. She held the pregnancy test in her hands, not to show him, just to remind herself. It was real. The courage had to come from within, and when the music stopped, she took a deep breath. Logan, I need to tell you something. He turned toward her, curious but calm. What is height? Emily walked toward him slowly, As if crossing a minefield, she sat beside him and took his hands in hers. They were warm. I don't know how to say this, and so I'll just say it. Silence fell between them. Like a veil. I'm pregnant for Amman. Logan didn't react. He blinked slowly, as if trying to decide whether he'd heard her right. What I found out yesterday, I took 2 tests. Both were a positive. I wanted to be sure before I told you. He stood up abruptly. Taking a few steps away, he ran his hand over his face, through his hair, then stopped. Emily felt her heart drop. I know this changes everything. I didn't plan it, but I don't regret it either. Logan turned to face her. His eyes were wet, but not with anger. Do you have any idea what this means, Tom? He said, voice thick with emotion. I've spent years believing I'd never have a something of my own again. Something real. He walked over to her, knelt in front of her, and gently placed his hand over her still, flat stomach. This is the greatest gift of my life. A single tear slipped down Emily's cheek. You're really happy I'm changed, and I want to do this right for you, for him or her. She laughed through the tears. That's so much more than I expected to hear. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly to his chest. And in that moment, Emily knew she wasn't alone, that this child would be born into a world where love was finally beginning to bloom, and Logan, who had only known the weight of loss, was beginning to understand the power of new life. Logan Blake's mansion, once a marble tomb of silence, now pulsed with life. The change hadn't come overnight, but it had taken root. It began with the little things, the sound of laughter echoing through the halls, the scent of fresh flowers in vases, the soft hum of music drifting from the kitchen radio. Emily moved from room to room, with one hand on her belly and the other holding a book. There was color in her eyes now, and on the walls Logan had the suite redecorated in warm tones, replaced theatric paintings in the living room with photos of the garden, and for the first time allowed the space to stop being a fortress and start becoming a home. He personally made her favorite tea, honey and lemon. He read to her before bed. He rested his hand on her stomach and whispered softly to the baby, even though there was no reply yet. Hey, little one, or not so little one, he'd say, pressing his forehead gently to her belly. It's your dad, and I promise this time I'll do everything differently. Would smile every time, because she knew those promises were made with his whole heart. The bitterness that once clouded his eyes was dissolving day by day. The anger that had fed him was slowly giving way to a peace he hadn't known in years. It was as if love was a forgotten muscle, and he was learning how to use it again, one movement at a time. One evening, while they had dinner in their garden, under strings of twinkling lights, Emily watched him quietly. You look like a year different man, she said, softly smiling. Logan looked at her with tenderness. I'm not different. I'm still, but with you, I've learned how to breathe again. She reached across the table and took his hand. You're not alone anymore, Logan. I know, he replied, intertwining his fingers with hers. And that's terrifying, but also freeing. The mansion, once a reflection of his grief, now reflected their shared hope. A home was being built, not with stone or contracts, but with gestures, meaningful silences, and a love that against all odds had won. But Emily knew the biggest moment was still ahead, and when it came, it would change everything forever. The early hours of the morning arrived with a gentle breeze and a full moon glowing high in the sky, as if the universe itself knew something sacred was about to unfold. Emily woke to a pain unlike anything she had ever felt, a deep, rhythmic tightening from within, as if life growing inside her was ready to step into the world. Logan, she gasped, it's starting. He was out of bed in a second, more nervous than she had ever seen him, for all the control he had in business here. He was just a man about to meet his son. The drive to the hospital was quick, but inside everything felt like slow motion. Emily gripped His hand tightly eyes shut her body, moving with nature's raw force. Logan never let go out. When she cried out, not when she said she couldn't go on, not for a single moment. He was there, completely. Hours later, the piercing cry of a newborn filled the room, and with it, something inside Logan shattered in the best way. It's a boy. The nurse announced with a warm smile. Emily was crying, exhausted you, glowing with a joy she had never known. Logan held the baby for the first time, wrinkled, warm eyes shut tight and fists clenched like a tiny warrior. Gabriel, he whispered, his name is Gabriel. Emily nodded, eyes filled with emotion, a messenger of light. Logan couldn't hold back the tears. I didn't know it was possible to love someone this fast, this deeply. He sat beside the bed, holding his son and laying his heart bare. Emily, you've given me everything I never even knew how to ask for. She smiled, tired but complete, and you showed me that even broken hearts can learn to beat again. He looked into her eyes filled with nothing but truth. You're the only woman I've ever truly loved. Theonly. One, she reached out and gently touched his cheek. Then love us me him every single day. And he promised right there in that room where everything began again. Because now Logan was no longer just a man marked by pain. He was a father, and finally he was whole. The mansion's garden bloomed like never before. Spring had arrived, bringing colors, sweet fragrances, and a gentle breeze that brushed their faces like a whispered thank you from the world itself. Emily walked hand in hand with Logan, while little Gabriel slept peacefully in his stroller, rocked by the sounds of nature and the peace that now filled their home. The stone path led tough, same bench where months earlier Emily had once sat alone, filled with fear and uncertainty. Now she sat there again, but she wasn't alone anymore. Logan joined her, eyes on their son, a soft smile playing at his lips. There was ease in his features. Now the tension that once hardened his expression had melted away, replaced by something much rarer. Serenity. Can you believe all this started with a contract? Emily said, almost laughing. A contract, me and a torn dress. He replied with a sideways glance, full of quiet mischief. She looked at him with tenderness, thighs glistening with the kind of emotion that comes when you realize you've made it through the storm. Logan, did you ever imagine we'd end up like this? She asked, her voice just above a whisper. He was silent for a few moments, watching the flowers sway in the wind. Then he turned to her with that look she had come to know so well. Theon, that held nothing but truth. No, and now no. I can't imagine it any other way. He reached for her hand, gently intertwined fingers. You're my home, Emily, not this house, not the money. You and now we have a whole world ahead of us to live this together. She smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. Then let's live it one day at a time. The baby stirred in his stroller as if wanting to join the conversation, and they both laughed softly, sincerely, in a sound that felt like a blessing on that moment. And so there, in the middle of the garden, among scars that had bloomed into flowers and promises that now had an amity, found something neither of them had been searching for, but that had always been what they needed most. A new beginning, a home, a love. Some people come into our lives as punishment, but end up staying as salvation. Emily and Logan started as enemies, pain, pride, revenge, but somewhere in the chaos, something pure, real, and transformative was born. So now I ask you, do you believe that love can bloom even in the most barren places? Have you ever lived through something that started all wrong but turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to you? The truth is sometimes the most twisted paths lead us exactly where we're meant to be. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love seeing how far these emotions are traveling. If this story touched your heart, leave a like. It truly helps the channel grow and bring you more stories like this one. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because we still have so many emotional journeys to live together.